Hello and welcome to the Occult Book Review Week 2. This week's book is The Secret History of the Gnostics by Andrew Phillip Smith. Gnosticism is very much like the story of the blind man and the elephant. Depending on how you approach it, you're going to come up with a different answer as to what it is. Because Gnosticism itself is not a spiritual path with a particular adherence to priesthood or ritual or one particular way of seeing things, it's very difficult to define it. In this regard, a book like this is a perfect introduction to the many interpretations of what Gnosticism is. We get an overall history, we get a writing style that is not condescending, it's humorous at times, and it's encyclopedic in its knowledge. And it's a book which I recommend for those who are thinking about approaching this particular book, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, because we're going to get a breakdown of the different schools of thought which make up this particular book and Gnostic thought in general. However, even breaking the Gnostics up into particular groups is controversial because Gnosis is all about personal enlightenment. The parallels between Eastern thought, Platonic thought, Neoplatonism, Judaic mysticism even, and for a time people were reluctant to talk about the Hermetic influence, but I think that's opening up now. We're seeing since the Nag Hammadi texts, we're finding that the Egyptian influence is definitely there, so there are syncretic roots to Gnostic thought. Now, in this particular book we do get an analysis of all of these particular influences. As the author explains in this book, one of the reasons that the Gnostics were probably thought of by some people as world haters is because of their bleak honesty about enlightenment itself, their preoccupation with the afterlife and what comes next might be seen by some to be antagonistic and a point of view that disregards earthly existence. But for the Gnostics, their version of enlightenment didn't really bring happiness and an easier life. In fact, Gnosis is still is often the cause of depression and personal chaos. It's not a place of fluffy clouds and My Little Pony wisdom. It's brutal and it's cruel, and it kind of performs a seemingly never-ending repetition of reality-changing insights that are very difficult to face. A great Gnostic podcaster, Miguel Connor, observes about Neo's awakening after he takes the pill in the Matrix, that reality, the pill doesn't bring you to paradise. What it does, it shows you exactly where you really are. So the book begins with descriptions of many of the Gnostic groups and myths and the Gnostic cosmogonies, this being the study of their interpretation of universal creation. For the Gnostics, this was mostly from from Genesis, and a lot of the main characters were turned into bad guys, demons, the demiurge, and peripheral characters were turned into revealers, redeemers, and the heroes. There's a great line in the first chapter of the book, I think, where the author says the only problem that the Gnostics had with the Bible is that they didn't agree with it. So the author describes how the Gnostics used the biblical text to make obscure characters, as we've said, redeemers, and the Jehovah, the demiurge. The book goes into detail relating various influences within Gnosticism, Neoplatonic thought, as we've mentioned, the Genesis story, Egyptian Hermetic influence. Now, one of the most important reflections upon reading the book is the fairness in which the author treats the different Gnostic groups. So he doesn't have a particular alliance with any one, so you get an overall well-rounded view of who the Gnostics were, from the Valentinians, the Manichaeans, to the Gnostic philosophers themselves. And there's a kind of this is the author's approach, obviously, but for people who are looking for scholarship and like a provable view of the Gnostics. There are many reasons which the author goes into why it's so difficult to come up with something like that. First of all, many of the texts, the original texts, have been destroyed. Now, since Nag Hammadi, we have a big library, all right. With the Old Testament, of course, many of the Old Testament stories are based on older Babylonian stories. For the Gnostics too, they were solitary practitioners for the most part, even within the particular groups they were in. Gnosis is all about personal revelation and enlightenment. Then you have, as the author describes very well, the definitions of dualism and the interpretation of what the Gnostics really were. Were they really world haters? Is that what dualism means? You get a good explanation, and you get viewpoints from both sides in this particular book. You also get a good breakdown of the relationship between Zoroastrianism and the kind of dualism that came into Gnosticism later. Another interesting symbol within Gnosticism is how the snake is often the redeemer figure. Now, I suppose this shouldn't surprise us too much, considering, as we've said already, a lot of the Old Testament stories have their roots in Babylonian myths anyway, and the snake is the oldest representation of a god trickster figure that we know of anyway, going back to the San people. I think it was 50 or 70,000 years ago in the oldest ritual so far discovered, but that's kind of an aside here. Another difference between Gnostic Christianity and Orthodox Christianity is the fact that Jesus is a revealer rather than a redeemer. And so for the propaganda for the Church Fathers, this was a heresy that they could jump upon. The author also goes into detail in relation to the aeons of Gnosticism, which are the emanations from the God above God, if you like. And he talks about the idea of them being mythological archetypes, but also being psychological attributes, and I find that very interesting myself. Also, the idea of the archons, do you see them as physical rulers, or are they civil systems, societal taboos and systems keeping us in our place? So you get a great overall view of the different ideas within Gnosticism, and not just back when these texts were written, but also how we've kind of interpreted them for our own kind of use and knowledge today. So what is Gnosis? Is it inevitable? Is it even beneficial? We've already kind of touched upon that. So my own take on Gnosis is that it's rather than it being a destination, it's more a way of traveling, if you like, when we shake ourselves loose of expectations of the kind of arcanistic corporate society, and the kind of responses we're supposed to have to things, we end up alone. Like that's what Gnosis is telling us. We have to learn, as all secret wisdom tells us, you have to die before you die. You have to learn how to die before you die. The logos then in Gnostic terms can be seen almost as a pattern, and there's kind of a relationship to the Tao there, if you think about it. And we're talking about a new way of being and interacting with the world. Enlightenment is not found by following another person, it's by going out on your own and achieving personal gnosis and seeing the world beyond the man-made world. The book also talks about how Gnosticism has been utilized by contemporary writers like Philip Pullman, Philip K. Dick, movies like The Matrix, The Truman Show, and so on, and talks about one interesting aspect of Gnosticism, which I hadn't really noticed before, is the lack of Gnostic art and architecture, and how Gnostics seem more interested in expressing their ideas through literature. So maybe that's obvious to some people, but it was something that I hadn't noticed before, that there were no kind of real Gnostic churches or symbols, really, I suppose. The book then goes on to asking, what did the Gnostics actually do, as well as what did they believe, and what did they think about fasting, about sex, about children, about bringing life into the world? Because if you're a Gnostic, I suppose, and you think that the real world is beyond this, there must have been a bit of a dilemma in terms of bringing children into the world. Like, were you trapping light, or were you actually liberating it? And that of course brings us to probably the most famous Gnostic group, the Cathars. The author also has a separate book just on the Cathars, but there's a good chapter in this book as well, all the way up to the Mandeans and contemporary Gnosticism today. We talk about, the author talks about the idea of a Gnostic sacrament, and you know, he talks about the consolamentum, I think it is, of the Cathars, which this was a practice where a Cathar leader or perfect was able to bestow spiritual gifts or blessings or sacraments upon people. But here's the twist: if the perfect himself or herself managed to slip up or sin or break their own vows, then all of the gifts that they had bestowed upon people were rendered null and void, so it affected everyone. Now, I kind of noticed a similarity to the San people of South Africa and some other shamanic based groups like that, where if a shaman is considered to be doing a bad job, the whole village are affected, and the whole village have to come together in order to save the shaman and bring him or her back onto the right path, in order for the village to be healed again. So it might be tenuous, but I thought there was an interesting parallel to the Cathars there. So I suppose with the snake symbol as well, maybe some other researcher can go and check that out. There might be something to it. But overall, I would recommend this particular book highly, and you can also check out the author's other books as well. As I said, one focuses on the Cathars. I think he also has another book out on John the Baptist and the Mandeans. So thanks to everyone who's shared the videos and liked and commented on Instagram. This show won't be on Facebook. Thanks. See you next week.